So an unbelievable week, it really in the history of South Florida sports, and it doesn't end. We get to continue it. Joining us here on the Johnny Cuba guest line, all guests are brought to us by the official beer of ZASLOW Show 2.0. We know it's a lifestyle brand, Johnny Cuba, European roots with a Caribbean soul, a refreshing German lager in a can. Make sure you pick up a six-pack at your local Sedano's, Presidente, Winn-Dixie, Fresco y Mas. Always drink responsibly, especially when, we're going through what we all went through last night. And don't forget, hey, maybe I should remember this. Don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. I was not tranquilo last night. Jessica Blaylock joining us here, Bally Sports Florida. I'm so glad to be able to catch up with you this morning. Good morning. You doing all right? Hello.
I am doing fantastic, Zaz. I'm doing fantastic.
Unbelievable. This is the golden age of Panther hockey right now. And, people can say whatever you want about that. The fact of the matter is, it has not been a good franchise. All right. This is the 29th year in franchise history. So this does happen to be the golden age of Panther hockey, where they've made the postseason now 3 consecutive years. First time ever. Again, pathetic, but first time ever. So, okay. And we're finally, if you're a lifelong Panther fan like myself, we're finally getting a team that matters every season. Like, God forbid you make the playoffs back-to-back years. And, like, God forbid you win a playoff series back-to-back years. And this is the first time that's ever happened, too. So there's so many people probably like me who are getting to experience this. Oh, my God, it's amazing. We've never had this in our lives.
And Zaz, it just speaks volumes. Just listening even to the excitement in your voice talking about it, right? Because I understand that even though I've only been covering Panthers hockey for 8 years, which is a long time. I mean, it is hard to believe that I'm in my 8th season of Panthers hockey, but I haven't been here since the very beginning. So I don't fully always understand maybe how long Panther fans have waited for something like this. I've had this cool front row seat over the past 8 years to kind of slowly see it be built, because you always knew you had significant pieces in an Alexander Barkov and an Aaron Ekblad, and up to this season, a Jonathan Huberdeau and things like that. But then over the past couple of years in particular, and really kind of correlating with when Bill Zito came in, you see these other pieces that slowly are game-changing pieces, whether it was Sam Bennett, whether it was Sam Reinhart, whether it was Brandon Montour, whether it was claiming Gustav Forsling off the waiver wire. And now, obviously, the biggest difference maker, going out and trading for Matthew Tkachuk, who this guy is just built different when it comes to the compete level and the emotion and the passion and the dragging his team into the fight and living for wanting the puck on his stick in the big moment. It's been so much fun over these past couple of seasons. And what this team just accomplished, I still don't even know if it's fully sunk in what a huge deal it is. We're talking not just a magical comeback, down 3-1 in the series, a magical comeback in game 7 where they're trailing by a goal with less than a minute to go. I mean, that goal by Brandon Montour literally found the net with 59.3 seconds left on the clock to tie it up. But what they did is historically one of the biggest upsets in the history of the National Hockey League. It's amazing. And I am still just so pumped and so full of joy for what these guys accomplished. I haven't stopped smiling since last night.
Did you have a hard time keeping it together on the post-game show?
Oh, 100%. And I think people can tell when they watch on a broadcast. I do get very emotionally invested in the teams that I cover, but honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I care about my job. I love my job so much. I'm so grateful for it. Why would I not be all in? You know what I mean? So I think I had more of a hard time keeping it together on the post-game show because I was just so excited and my thoughts were everywhere and there was so much that I wanted to talk about and there were so many people that I wanted to give credit to, because it wasn't just Carter Verhaeghe with the overtime winner. It wasn't just Brandon Montour. It wasn't just the guys that assisted. I mean, we're talking about, we got to go back to Alex Lyon starting the series and give him props for what he's done. We got to thank the Nick Cousins and the Colin Whites and the Etu Losterainens and the Anton Lundell. You know what I mean? Like, you literally have to go through when you look at this comeback in this series. And it wasn't just the big boys. I mean, it was literally every single player finding a way to make an impact with their time out on the ice. And that, I think, is what also makes it so special, is that you weren't just carried by a Tkachuk or a Barkov or, a Verhaeghe or a Bennett. You literally, Lundell and Luosterainen may have been the biggest, and Reinhart may have been some of the biggest key contributors in Game 6. So it's just really cool to see collectively that every single guy deserves such a huge part in that celebration of what this team just did.
You made a great point after the game ended last night, and I didn't realize it in the moment. I had forgotten about it, where, okay, they're playing the Maple Leafs now, and that was the instance where it all turned around, where, Paul Maurice was mother effing them on the bench, and they had lost 4 in a row at the time. Yes. And then you had Reinhart, who scored with the empty net, and then Montour won it in overtime. And from that point on, like, away we go. And so now we get that in the second round here. But I also thought that Paul Maurice made a great point in the post game last night when he talked about, he felt that there was a moment, and I assume it was this moment, or
it was.
Yeah, yes, he said there was a moment where the players began to take control of their bench, and that being the turning points. I thought it was really cool that Paul Maurice also pointed that out.
Yeah, and I keep going back to that moment because I think every single one of us, there were so many things just emotionally going on in that game, right? Knowing that the Panthers had lost 4 straight after getting themselves back into a wild card spot, knowing that because of losing 4 straight, they were back out of a wild card spot after just getting themselves in, knowing that the first period and a half of that game against the Leafs, they just looked out of it, and I don't know if it was kind of the physical exhaustion of everything they had gone through to that point or what, but they just weren't playing like a team possessed. They needed to be a team possessed, and they weren't playing like it. And I don't think anybody will forget Paul Maurice on the bench. I mean, you did not have to be a master lip reader to figure out what the gist of the message was. And from that moment on, they end up coming back, like you said, the Reinhart goal late to tie it up, Montour and OT, Alex Lyon making that monster save on Austin Matthews in overtime. And after the game, Coach said that was a player-driven win. And I remember seeing him at practice the next day because that game was obviously on the road in Toronto. I remember wanting to ask him about that at practice, later on. And he talked about just the importance of this time of the year and how the coaching staff really kind of fades to the background and the players have to take ownership of the product out on the ice. And then obviously after that overtime win against the Leafs, we know what the team did, ended up finishing 6-1-1 down the final 8 games of the season and got themselves in. And now, it's so cliche, but we talk about it all the time. All you have to do is get yourself in, and then anything can happen. And we've seen it. Just like Matthew Tkachuk said, there are so few people who gave the Panthers a fighting chance in this series. Predicted it was going to be a sweep, predicted that it wouldn't be that competitive, that Boston was just going to roll. And look what happened. And now you take down Boston in the first round. I mean, you really talk about all bets are off now. I just can't wait to see what this team is going to do because it's such a different feel than last year. right? When they won the President's Trophy and they went and got, Clojuru and some of these other players at the trade deadline, they were all in and the expectations were there. And obviously the team fell short of what the expectations were. But this year, it's just such a different feel and such a different team and such a different mentality in a way surrounding the playoffs. And just, I come back to Tkachuk, just, I think being such a huge part of that. But I can't wait. I can't wait to see what this team is going to do from here on out.
Like I mentioned earlier in the show today, at this point, and I want to get to expectations in a second with you, but from this point on now, no matter what happens, the front office, Paul Maurice, they were right. You know, for all the criticism all throughout the year, criticism from me throughout the year, criticism from everyone, everything that they had been saying and preaching, and this is going to prepare us to be able to win games in the playoffs. We're going to change our style. This is how to win. That team last year doesn't win, I don't think, any of the games that they won in this series, okay?
Yeah.
And the way that they were able to now win this series and beat the number one overall team regular season ever, no matter what happens now, the rest of this playoff, the front office and Paul Maurice, they were right.
Yeah, and just two things, off of that. Number one, I pointed this out in the post-game show last night also, what Bill Zito said at the trade deadline, because a lot of people wondered, what were the Panthers going to do? And
I thought they were going to sell. I did.
They ended up being the only team in the entire league that did not make a move. And we met with Bill Zito, obviously, later on that day after everything was done. And he said, we didn't want to give up on this group. We believe in this group. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And then Zaz, the second thing, I think one of the times I came on with you earlier in the season, I can't remember if this was a conversation that we had or not, but I know I've had this conversation with multiple people. The point that I kept going back to in the midst of people's frustrations was you have to understand that this team was learning a completely different style of hockey and a completely different system than what they have known for years. And you're mixing in new faces into that equation. So they were going to go through growing pains. They had to, because you don't just unlearn something in the course of a week, or sometimes even the course of a month, or even sometimes the course of a couple of months. To unlearn, especially the way that you have known how to play a professional sport, it takes time. And that's, I think, why we saw these growing pains early on when you're like, why can't this team hold a lead in the third period where they were so good about that last year? Like, why do they look kind of out of sorts? Like, why isn't this all coming together? Well, I think it was part of that process of exactly what Paul Maurice talked about at the beginning of the year, the importance of not subtracting from the offense, but learning how to add defense and learning how to play a playoff style of hockey. So, and even just kind of going back to that was another thing that I asked Bill Zito about at the trade deadline. If coming into this season, knowing, all of those things, if he did expect there to be some growing pains, and he said that he absolutely did. So I think that kind of combined, those two elements, knowing that they were going to go through a process of having to take steps back for the purpose of being able to take steps forward. And that just belief by Bill and Paul not to give up on this group, not to make changes at the deadline. We're seeing the team reap the benefits of that belief by everybody in that room, by everybody in that front office, and by everybody on the coaching staff.
I love how games, I mean, I don't necessarily love it in the moment, or I don't appreciate it in the moment. I love how games last night make me feel where, and I've been through a million of those with the Heat, over the last, 15 years, really, 15 plus years. I love the anxiety and the agita, and I love that feeling. But what I went through last night, it can't be healthy. Like, there's no way what happened last night can be good for me. And like when the game ended, or maybe it was when Montour scored the tying goal, and my older son was like, "You're gonna have a heart attack." It can't be healthy. What I went through last night, I needed that 15-minute intermission to regroup going into overtime, and by the way,
I know, because I'm pretty sure, I wasn't kidding. I think when I threw to the second intermission report, Goldie, threw it to me, and I was like, how are we all doing? Are we good? Because my heart rate is off the charts, and my palms literally, I wasn't kidding when I said my palms were sweating, and my heart rate, like, I almost wish I had my heart rate monitor on last night, so I could have just watched progressively as the game went on, how much more intense my heart rate got, because it's so true. And this just comes from having a passion, right? For the teams that you cover, the teams that you love. I was such a bundle of nerves during that entire third period, and I couldn't sit down for overtime. I stood in our studio, and the big monitor on the wall, I just kept moving closer and closer to it, because I get closer and closer to
they play better when you get closer.
Yes, the more nervous I get, the closer and closer I end up moving to the television throughout the course of a game. But I look back at game 6 and game 7 and think to myself, those are quite possibly two of the most fun games I've ever covered in my career. But they easily, Zaz, took minimum like 10 years off of my life, like minimum.
I think game 6 was the best Panther game I've ever seen in my life.
That atmosphere too at the arena was off the charts. Like, shout out to Panther fans. Like, that arena for game 6 was the best I have ever seen the arena. And so much so that it impacted the players to the point that they all talked about it the next day at practice, as did Paul Maurice. It was so electric. It was so full of life and energy, and just incredibly fun to be a part of.
This is what happens when you have a team that can put together multiple seasons in a row of success. And this franchise has never had it. And that scene, game 6, it was only the first round. That scene is what you get when you have a team that could have just a little bit of consistent success.
Yeah, and then think about it. Think about all the guys on this team that are going to be around for a while. Specifically Barkov, Verhaeghe, Bennett, Tkachuk. We've got Tkachuk for the next 8 years. We've got Barkov for the next 8 years. Or he might be in the second year of his 8-year deal. But either way, we've got these guys for the long haul. And the best part is, all of these players, this dressing room really is so special. They want to be here. You look around the league, you look at what players say, they want to come to Florida. This has become a destination city for players to want to come to. And I think that's what's so cool about it is this isn't going away anytime soon. This has now been built for consistent success. And that to me is what makes it even more exciting.
It's interesting, it's such a big deal that they won this series. It's the greatest upset in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I think because there's that at the forefront, what gets lost in it a little bit is they came back down 3-1. That part I think doesn't get talked to, because the headline is a big enough deal. But they also came back 3-1, which the franchise has never done before. That's enormous.
And how crazy is this? Add this into it. They were down 3-1, and then the Bruins got Patrice Bergeron back, the heart and soul of their team. And then the Bruins went 0-3 with the return of their captain. That to me is even more nuts, because that is such an emotional lift to get a player like Bergeron, who has the second most, current active playoff experience. He's played the most game 7s in NHL history, behind only his former teammate Zdeno Chara. how good he is, multiple Selkies, the way now you bring him back and he can match up with that top line and Barkov, and the Panthers go 3-0 against the Bruins with the return of Patrice Bergeron. I think that's another thing that we really didn't even highlight that much because there were just so many other aspects that were such a big deal. But like, to me, that also speaks volumes to be able to do that with the Bruins getting that guy back. It's amazing.
So this is very controversial now, what I have to bring up to you. Forever, the greatest goal, the greatest moment in Panther history has been Billy Lindsay's Game 5 goal against the Bruins in '96. First ever series win. He gets I got it right here. You could see this right here. This diagram is the Billy Lindsay goal. All right, that's the play. He gets around the Hall of Famer. Ray Bourque. That's been the greatest moment. I knocked it off last night, Jess. I think it's number 2 now. I think that was the greatest moment in Panther history last night. I'm knocking down Billy Lindsay's goal to number 2.
I saw your tweet and I was like, wow, that's actually an interesting debate. You should post a Twitter poll or something and see what Panther fans think, like which moment they would vote for, because obviously the significance of Bill Lindsay's goal and how early it still was in the franchise and playing that team. And like you mentioned, the Hall of Famer, Ray Bourque, like skating around. It's just that there's so much about that goal that's so iconic and just such a significant moment for the franchise. Obviously, I wasn't around at that time, but I know just how significant that moment is for this team and its history. And it's so hard because without a doubt, this being the biggest upset in the history of the league against the greatest regular season team of all time. I think it's a great conversation to have to see which goal Panther fans would now deem as the number 1 moment in franchise history. I think you got to do a poll because I want to see what Panther fans. It's harder for me to speak to it because, like I said, I wasn't here for the Bill Lindsay goal. But I would love to know for Panther fans who really have been around since day one, who were there for both Billy's goal and who are here obviously for Hagee's goal, which one they consider to be the most significant, because I think it's a great, really fun conversation to have.
So finally here, Jess, when we talk about expectation, when the postseason started, it was like, all right, can we hang with this Boston team? Can we win a few games? Like it was all about, see, it's funny. Last year when the playoffs started, my number 1 focus was to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
This year, getting into the playoffs, it was, can we possibly play with this Boston team? Now, because they beat them, I think the expectation changes now. And now it's like, yeah, I want them to go win the Stanley Cup.
Yes, 100%. You're always, the ultimate goal is to win the cup. And I think this team absolutely believes, especially now after knocking off Boston, that they're fully capable of it. I think the biggest difference is not so much the expectations, but maybe like the level of pressure, right? Because to use kind of a cliche term, the Panthers in a sense are playing with house money. Like even Game 7 last night, it was not the pressure on the Panthers. All the pressure was on Boston, because if Boston didn't win that game, all anybody's going to talk about is the historic postseason collapse for them, right? So I think it's not so much that the expectation of winning a cup isn't there. I think it's just the pressure that maybe that team felt last year, being the President's Trophy winner, going out and getting some of the players that they did at the trade deadline, knowing, the number of points they had in the regular season, knowing what certain players did in the regular season, versus this year. I think that there's just a different feeling as far as maybe being able to play loose and really just being able to play your style of hockey, because that pressure is not nearly what it was last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Unbelievable. What a week. I mean,
what a week.
What a week.
I mean, honestly, like, not to even get lost in anything, a shout out to the Heat for what they were able to do. Shout out to the Panthers for what they were able to do. And let's give the Marlins some love too, because they just got their first sweep of the season, taking care of business in all 3 games against the Cubs.
Yeah.
And now, a couple of games above 500. So it was just a great week in general for South Florida sports fans. So
Amazing.
Just awesome all around the board to see what all those teams were able to accomplish.
And you guys are done now with the Panthers, right? You're done.
No. So we're done with game broadcast, but we will continue to do hour-long post-game shows.
Okay.
Every game between the Leafs and the Cats. So you'll still get, at least on Bally Sports Florida, some local coverage, some local perspective. Goldie and Katie flew to Toronto with the team, so they'll be on site to get interviews and all that good stuff. And then Randy will be joining me in the studio for a full hour-long breakdown of each game.
I was wondering, because the game is tomorrow, so they just went right to Toronto last night.
They did. So the team was originally scheduled to fly back from Boston. They were going to stay in Boston last night no matter what, and then fly back this morning to South Florida. But with the game being now tomorrow, instead, they reorganized their plans, and they just flew straight from Boston to Toronto today.
Okay. Amazing job. Amazing. Oh, so exciting. Very exciting. And tomorrow night, you got the Heat and Panthers. Do we know what time the Panther game is tomorrow?
I believe it's at 7. It's got to be at either 7.
It's at 7. It's at 7. Yep. And let's see what time the Heat is tomorrow. The Heat tomorrow are 7:30. All right, so no favors that either league has given us there.
No, and that's the thing. Come on, NBA, NHL. What are we doing here?
Like one time, I would have liked a Heat game to start a little bit later.
Work together.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Hopefully, when the home schedule for the Panthers comes out, it doesn't coincide with everything the Heat have already scheduled. Hopefully we get a little bit of luck there as far as those, like alternating days. Oh my God, would be amazing. Can we do that?
I know. Unreal. But either way, we're still going to have fun. We're still going to enjoy the hell out of it.
Great job, Jess. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning.
Appreciate it, Zaz. Always love catching up with you.